Welcome to Not Your Inspiration, the podcast where we do really pathetically awful British accents. My name is Gray, I'm 100% American, and I cannot keep that up any longer. Today we are doing it. We are going all in. We're doing my most requested episode by far, and that is, drumroll please, we are going to talk about disability representation in Hollywood. I know, how exciting. Before we jump into that, there are a few people I would like to thank for contributing to this podcast. The first person is my anonymous donor who gave me $200 to buy a pair of headphones. That is much appreciated. I love when strangers give me money on the internet, so thank you very warmly. I would like to thank Christy Pars, who is New Punk and New Punk on Tumblr, for promoting every single episode I put out. And I would like to thank Willow, who is Spaffy-Jimble on Tumblr, for leaving very insightful comments on so many of my episodes, and also writing a very nice blurb about me on her blog. So thank you to those people for contributing so kindly to this podcast. And without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's get into the meat of this episode because I've been waiting for this. This is my thing, you guys. I can talk for a long time about this. I did research, actually. Research, quote unquote, air quote research. I forget that I'm recording. You guys can't see me doing air quotes. It was kind of interesting. My sister was like, oh, do you want to watch a movie? And I'm like, sure. We were, going through Netflix, debating what to watch. And she's like, what if we watch Me Before You? And I was like, all right, you know what? Let's do it. And I'm sitting there with my notepad writing a podcast script. So yeah, it's time. We got to do this episode. I think we all know not all of us. I think within the disability community, it's pretty well known how bad Hollywood is at writing accurate stories about disabled lives and casting disabled people to play those roles. I think it's also pretty wide known within the community that roles for disabled characters are almost always or very often white men and almost all of the time heterosexual. We all know those are bad things, and they are. I don't want to underplay it. Well, we're going to talk about it, but I also want to dig a little deeper and talk about why those things are. I don't want to just sit here and talk for 20 minutes about, it's really bad that able-bodied actors play disabled roles all the time. Yes, it is, but I think that it would be a little too easy for me to just say that and say nothing else on it. So that's kind of my, preface to this episode is it's bad that able-bodied actors are playing disabled roles, and it's bad that disabled roles are written by able-bodied writers, directed by able-bodied directors with so little input from disabled people. That's awful. That being said, let's dig deeper. It's interesting because it's so hard for disabled actors to get a job in Hollywood, and able-bodied casting directors oftentimes do not even let disabled actors audition for roles that are of a disabled character. And it's sort of this lose-lose situation where able-bodied people mock us and judge us when we don't have jobs, and then they don't hire us. And that goes for all professions, not just acting. I'm talking about acting because it ties into my whole media thing, but it goes for carpentry or, finance managing, anything. They call us lazy and just leeching off the government when we don't work, and then they don't hire us. They can't have it both ways. They have to pick one. And my question is kind of why don't able-bodied people, specifically in this case, able-bodied casting directors in Hollywood, hire disabled actors for film? And that's the huge question. I think if we had the answer to that, we'd be winning. And I don't think anyone does. Why don't able-bodied people hire disabled people? Giant question mark. There's no one answer. But I'm going to throw in my 2 cents and my opinion because that's what I do. That's what I'm here for. I think there's still this really prevalent idea that disabled people are not competent. and that disabled people are somehow lazy or not as capable as able-bodied people. Obviously, that's bullshit. It's not true. In fact, the opposite is almost true. And I think if you went up to an able-bodied person on the street and you're like, hey, are disabled people, like, not competent? They'd be like, no, of course not. Like, I'm politically correct. Like, and, you know, they wouldn't admit that that's what they think, but I think it's like an internal bias that a lot of people have in our society. And to be fair, I think it's one that I sort of had when I was able-bodied. I wasn't a casting director. I was 12, but still. So I feel like that's really instilled in us, and the reason why that would take a whole other episode on disability history, but I feel like it's kind of really just this idea that disabled people are unproductive members of society, which is really ironic because if no one will hire us, then in their eyes we're going to be quote-unquote unproductive members of society. If they want us to contribute to like their lovely, lovely capitalism and make money and have jobs and be air quotes productive members of society, then they're going to have to bite the bullet and give us jobs at some point. That's a bit of a sidetrack, but I don't think it's too much of a sidetrack. When able-bodied actors play disabled roles, not only are they taking jobs away from disabled actors, but they're often perpetuating the very stigma that keeps jobs away from those people in the first place. So when able-bodied actors play disabled characters, you know, first of all, they're working a job that a disabled actor could work, but oftentimes they're portraying the character in a very helpless, tragic, incompetent way. And then society goes and they pay millions of dollars in box office tickets and they watch that movie and they see that able-bodied actor playing a character. And I don't want to use any names, but let's just say hypothetically that this actor is called Benedict Cumberbatch. And they see Benedict playing this character and they internalize it in their minds and they say, you know, oh yeah, like that is how disabled people are. You know, they really are helpless or tragic or nothing unless they overcome their disabilities or whatever that particular trope is in that movie. And it kind of just is this never-ending cycle where disabled people don't get hired because of a stigma, and then the work that the able-bodied people create in their stead perpetuates that stigma. And it's like it does not end. It is a vicious cycle and it propels itself. And I know that with Hollywood, like, oh, it's so hard to break into the industry. And yeah, I know, it's hard to break into the industry. But when was the last time that you saw a disabled actor in a main role in a big budget Hollywood movie? Not like a small indie film, which by the way is not much better, but like a big budget Hollywood movie. Because the answer is really not often. And so it just kind of perpetuates this stigma. And that stigma, I think, like, has many different forms. There are different tropes in Hollywood. And this has been talked about a lot. And it has been talked about much more eloquently than I'm about to talk about it. The YouTube channel This Is Cripple has a few really good videos on it, which if you're watching on YouTube, I will link some of her videos in my description. If you are listening on the podcast app, I will have them in the show notes. She talks about some of the tropes in Hollywood much better than I'm about to. That being said, I feel like, in my opinion, you have kind of the negative, like, downer tropes and, like, the positive, uplifting tropes. They all have a negative impact on the disabled community. So I don't want to say, oh, it's a positive trope and have anyone think that I mean it's a good impact. They're all negative on the disabled community, but it's just how able-bodied audiences perceive them. So I think in the, like, downer tropes, you have the story of, you know, like, oh, well, before the accident, I was a prominent athlete and now I'm nothing and life is horrible and I want to kill myself. You have that sort of tragic downfall. I think you have like just the bitter, like I just drink all day and do nothing and I hate my life, and I don't hate it because, society is awful or anything. I hate it because I'm disabled and that's just awful and evil and there's no future for me trope. In like the quote unquote positive tropes, of course you have the cure narrative stories where like, I was completely paralyzed before, but now, for the sake of a happy ending and millions of dollars from Mr. Director, I can walk. I think you have like the martyr stories where it's, like, I became disabled, but like, my beautiful wife took care of me forever and blah, blah, blah. So I think those are kind of, and of course you have just the inspiring stories, just like the inspiration porn. Classic inspiration porn stories where able-bodied audiences are just sitting there with a tear weeping and crying, and disabled audiences are just sitting there rolling their eyes. And also, to all of there are like 3 able-bodied listeners on this podcast. 2 of them are my friends, 1 of them is my date mate. Those are the 3. Anyway, to you guys, inspiration porn is basically taking disabled lives and making them easy for able-bodied people to consume and get inspired by. So it's able-bodied people being inspired by like totally mundane things that disabled people do. Like, oh, you got out of bed today, but you only have 1 arm. Like, oh, God bless, 1 like equals 1 respect, that kind of shit. It's super dehumanizing. It's ridiculously patronizing, really condescending, all around just disrespectful and inaccurate. Just bad representation, not representation at all. And it is again just using disabled lives for able-bodied mass consumption, and I don't think any of us are really here for it. I will link Stella Young's TED Talk on inspiration porn in my show notes or YouTube description, depending on where you're listening to this. So if you have not seen that, highly recommend watching it. It's a really, really good TED Talk. Like, seriously, watch it. Learn something. Enjoy it. Anyway. So that's what inspiration porn is, and I think a lot of those movies fall into that category. I think some of them fall into the tragedy porn category, which is my dog's barking in the background. She'll probably be barking for a few minutes, so you're gonna have to ignore that. That's my dog Evie, and she just wants in on this conversation, you guys. She's the one true ally. No other able-bodied being on this earth is going as hard as my dog is. Anyway, so tragedy porn is the same thing, except it's tragic, and instead of inspiring able-bodied audiences, it makes them want to cry. It is equally as dehumanizing, inaccurate, and disrespectful. It just goes in like the other direction on the spectrum. So it just goes the other way on the spectrum. Sorry, that's kind of incoherent. My dog would not shut up, so I had to do some fancy schmancy editing here. So hello from post. Anyway, tragedy porn is equally as awful, and I feel like at the end of the day, those are the 2 types of movies. They're both for able-bodied consumption. Neither of them are for disabled audiences. They're not for disabled actors, they're not for disabled writers, they're not for disabled directors, and they're not for disabled audiences. And I feel like that's what disability is. It's a world that is not designed for you. It's a world that can feel very, like it's isolating you. It can feel very isolating because nothing is designed for you when it comes to sidewalks or doorways or parking spaces. And media is not designed for our consumption when it comes to movies, books, magazine covers, not to name any names, Kylie. And it's just like all of this stuff that perpetuates a stereotype in able-bodied minds, and oftentimes when disabled people speak out about it, we are branded as angry or being ridiculous or being unfair, and we're discredited because of that. And we're not being ridiculous, we're not being unfair, we are angry, and we're angry because this has gone on for a really, really long time. So another thing that I want to touch on is the term cripping up, which basically is what you call it when an able-bodied actor plays a disabled character. I like the term, I use the term, it's totally fine. I've read some articles comparing Cripping Up to blackface. And this is a very touchy subject. Everyone has a different opinion on this. I think it's ridiculous. I think it does not compare to blackface at all. I think it's bad. Like, are able-bodied actors playing disabled characters bad? Absolutely. It's awful. Does it equate to the level that blackface equates to? No, it doesn't. And I think it's really important to take in historical considerations to this. Like, it's not good, but a lot of white disabled people are writing blog posts comparing it to blackface, and almost all the time they're written by white people. It is not blackface. It's bad. It's important to talk about. I'm talking about it here, but stop, honestly. Like, just stop. It's honestly just, it's erasure of Black Americans' struggles and experiences to compare a movie like Me Before You or Breathe that just came out, or My Left Foot, to literal actual blackface. That's my 2 cents on the issue. I was asked to talk about this. That's my opinion. I know people have different opinions. That's mine. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. It's frustrating. This is my new topic, my new segue. It's really, really frustrating to see really famous able-bodied actors winning Oscars and Tonys, Emmys, whatever awards they're going to win for playing disabled characters. And it happens all the time. And it's just a giant slap in the face, because we are not winning Oscars. We're not famous in Hollywood for just living our lives. In fact, most of us are living below the poverty line. And meanwhile, there are other people out there, not to name names, but again, let's use a hypothetical fake name that I just make up and say, I don't know, like Daniel Day-Lewis, winning Oscars for playing disabled characters, and playing disabled characters just living their lives. Meanwhile, disabled people are struggling to access meds and healthcare. It's a slap in the face. It's really not okay. And able-bodied people do not seem to care one iota. Of course, there are disabled characters played by disabled people that we see on TV and in movies. There just are so few. And oftentimes, even those roles are written by able-bodied writers for an able-bodied audience, and it's great. Like, I don't want to undermine that. You know, we have shows like the son in Breaking Bad, whose name I forgot, very sorry, and Game of Thrones. You know, like, we do see it. It's not enough. Another cool thing that I feel like we're just now really starting to see is what was originally written as an able-bodied character played by a disabled actor, and they changed it around. So this would be like Dustin from Stranger Things, or Ali Stroker's character in Deaf West Spring Awakening. So we do see it happening. I don't want to not mention that. I don't want to undermine that, but it's not enough, because often those shows are not as popular as the other tragedy porn and inspiration porn ones. And even when they are, it's still often for the consumption of able-bodied audiences. It'd be really nice to have a movie or TV series or something that's written by disabled people for disabled people. Like, could you imagine, like, a cripple punk movie or a cripple punk TV series that's just about disabled people living their lives? I would watch the hell out of that. I don't know about you guys. And that's another thing, is we often don't see disabled characters just doing things. Like, you know, a movie about, I don't know, like a school teacher who has a secret job as an NSA agent who just happens to have one leg. Like, we don't see that very often. The stories we see often really focus around the disability and use it as a heavy, heavy plot point. And this can be, I don't know, some people don't think it's that bad, but I think it would be nice to see just characters who are disabled, and that's just what it is. It's oftentimes the same thing with the queer characters that we see in media. Like, we don't need to keep seeing, like, tragic stories that are just soul-crushingly sad about white twinks. Like, we get it. Where's my story about, like, I don't know, I'm a farmer and I happen to find a rocket ship in my backyard and I happen to be trans? Like, I don't know, something. You know, like, our lives, it's not like we wake up in the morning and we're, like, going on this beautifully written poetic monologue about, like, you know, I looked out and I saw the sun streaming in through my window. I was reminded of how never again my feet shall walk the earth. Like, that's not what it's like, okay? We wake up and we're like, oh, fuck, I forgot to take meds, you know? Like, it's normal life. It's just life. It's not that dramatic. It's not that tragic. It is sure as hell not that inspiring. And I'm not saying there aren't inspiring disabled people. There are plenty of disabled people I find inspiring. But I don't find them inspiring because they woke up in the morning. I find them inspiring because of the things they did. Like Frida Kahlo, for example, did not revolutionize surrealism painting, and she was not a total balls-to-the-walls, communist, bisexual, anti-gender roles force in the world just to be called an inspiration because she got hit by a bus. She is inspiring for many other things. She also got hit by a bus or was in a bus crash. You know, so like, disabled people can be inspiring, but when disabled people say that they find another disabled person inspiring, it's in a very different way than able-bodied people say it. We don't mean it like, oh, they're inspiring because they got married. Like, no, that's not what we mean. The final thing I want to say before I wrap this up is, this was interesting. This was a conversation I was having with someone about, like, is it bad to enjoy movies that feature some of the problems that I've talked about? And my answer is no, it's not. I think it's okay to enjoy a movie every now and then that is, you know, with an able-bodied actor playing a disabled character, or a disabled, an able-bodied writer writing for an able-bodied audience. Like, I don't think you're an evil, awful, disabled person for occasionally enjoying a movie like that. I don't think it makes you a bad activist. Like, it's okay, you guys, you know, like, it doesn't have to be totally black and white, like, oh my god, I don't know what to do with myself, I accidentally really liked such and such movie, and now I can't ever participate in cripple punk space. Like, no, calm down, it's okay. You know, you can like the occasional movie and still have a really big problem with the underlying principle. It doesn't make you a hypocrite, it just means you enjoyed the occasional movie, you know? If you like all of them, or you like one that's like really, really problematic, okay, maybe then we can talk about internalized ableism. But like, if it's like not really that problematic of a movie and it just happens to be good, I think you're in the clear. That's my opinion. So yeah, that's my thing. And it's not just really a call for just for disabled actors, but it's also a call for disabled writers. It's a call for disabled directors, disabled casting directors, disabled producers. It's a call for all of it. I don't just want disabled actors. Like, I feel like all of it needs more disabled people. We need more visible disabled people. Like, that's just would be so great if we had that. It would be great for everyone. It'd be great for kids who are disabled and looking up for role models. It would be great for adults. It would be great for society to learn a thing or two. On that note, I'm going to say I have a Patreon now, so check that out. It is patreon.com/notyorinspo. It will also be linked, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, And if you are listening on YouTube, subscribe. If you're listening on the podcast app, subscribe. Blah, blah, blah. Bullshit self-promo. All right. We are over that. Thank you for listening. I will talk to you soon. And as always, take care of yourselves.